I'm Eliza Morgan, 32 years old, and teaching art at Riverside Community College. My brother Jason has always made it clear that my life choices would never measure up to his definition of success. Years of his subtle digs, and not so subtle, comparisons culminated at his engagement party, surrounded by wealthy guests in tailored suits, when he raised his crystal champagne flute and announced, "Some of us rise to meet our potential, while others just exist." His eyes locked with mine, across the room. That's when I decided enough was enough. I walked straight up to him, handed him a carefully wrapped box, and said, "For the groom." Before I tell you what was in that box, and how it changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button. If you want more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics and finding your own path to success. Growing up in our middle-class family in Woodbridge, Connecticut meant understanding that stability was the highest virtue. According to my parents, Michael and Linda Morgan, Dad worked as an insurance adjuster, and Mom taught 4th grade at the local elementary school. They valued predictability and security above all else, creating a home where taking risks was discouraged and playing it safe was rewarded. From the very beginning, Jason, 3 years my senior, seemed to understand and embody everything our parents valued. He brought home perfect report cards, captained the debate team, and played baseball well enough to impress Dad's weekend friends. I was different. While Jason collected academic awards and sports trophies, I filled sketchbooks with drawings and painted whenever I could find the space and time. Our differences became the defining feature of our relationship, with Jason quick to point out how his path would lead to success, while mine was just playing around. I remember the first time I truly understood where I stood in our family's hierarchy of values. I was 12, and my watercolor of our town's historic bridge had won first place in a statewide student art competition. The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in May, the same day as Jason's regional debate finals. There was never even a discussion about which event my parents would attend. Jason's debate was simply more important. I received my award while looking out at an audience of strangers, my teacher, Ms. Peterson, being the only one to cheer for me. When I brought home the blue ribbon and modest cash prize, Mom said, "That's nice, honey," before turning back to helping Jason prepare his argument for the national finals. The winning painting was hung in the hallway, while Jason's trophies dominated the living room mantel. This pattern continued throughout our childhood. Family dinners became showcases for Jason's latest accomplishments. Jason ranked first in his class again, Dad would announce proudly. And he's been selected for the Youth Leadership Summit in Washington. My news about art club exhibitions or community mural projects was met with polite nods and quick shifts. Back to Jason's achievements. Perhaps the most painful memory from those years was the night I spent hours completing a detailed sketch for a school project. I left it carefully arranged on the kitchen table, planning to add color the next morning. When I came down for breakfast, I found Jason had shoved my work aside to make room for his study materials, tearing the corner of my drawing in the process. When I protested, my mother shook her head and said, "Eliza, you need to be more understanding. Your brother has his SAT prep this week." I learned early that in our family hierarchy, Jason's conventional achievements would always trump my creative pursuits. His dismissive comments became a regular feature of our interactions. "Art is just a hobby, Liz," he would say, using the nickname I hated. "It's not something people actually make a living doing." During my sophomore year of high school, when I mentioned wanting to apply to art schools, Jason laughed and said, "Hope you enjoy being a starving artist." My parents didn't explicitly agree, but their silence spoke volumes. By the time we were teenagers, the dynamic was firmly established. Jason was the star, the one who would make something of himself, while I was the dreamer who needed to find a real path. Eventually, our relationship deteriorated into a one-sided competition I never asked to join, with Jason constantly comparing our achievements, and our parents unconsciously reinforcing the narrative that his path was superior. I began to hide my artwork and my aspirations, sharing them only with teachers and friends who understood their value. When Jason left for college with a scholarship to Princeton, the house felt both emptier and somehow more peaceful. I had 2 years of high school left without his constant presence, reminding me of my perceived inadequacies. But the groundwork had been laid for years of complicated feelings, and a brother who would never see me as his equal. The divergence in our paths became even more pronounced as we entered adulthood. Jason blazed through Princeton with honors, making connections with the children of judges and business leaders. His social media posts showcased spring breaks in exotic locations with his wealthy friends, internships at prestigious firms, and acceptance to Harvard Law. Meanwhile, I fought a quiet battle at home, trying to convince my parents that Rhode Island School of Design wasn't just a pipe dream, but my legitimate future. Art school costs too much for what you get out of it, Dad said, during one particularly heated discussion. Why not major in education or graphic design at State? Something practical. My mother's concerns were wrapped in worry, rather than dismissal. I just don't want you struggling your whole life, sweetie. Their reluctance to support my choice meant I had to find my own way. I applied for every scholarship available, worked extra shifts at the local cafe, and still had to take out substantial student loans to make RISD possible. When my acceptance letter arrived, my parents' congratulations came with thinly veiled concern. The loan papers they signed were accompanied by sighs and warnings about debt. Meanwhile, Jason's law school acceptance warranted a special family dinner. The contrast in our young adult years couldn't have been more striking. While Jason stepped confidently into a world of corporate law, with a 6-figure starting salary at Bennett, Phillips & Stern in Boston, I juggled waitressing, campus jobs, and freelance illustration gigs to supplement my loans while completing my fine arts degree. Our lives intersected, mainly during holiday gatherings, which became showcases for our different trajectories. During one particularly memorable Christmas, Jason arrived with designer luggage and presents for everyone wrapped in paper that probably cost more than I spent on the gifts inside. "This is for you, Liz," he said, handing me a slender box that contained an expensive fountain pen. "I thought you might need something professional now that you're about to enter the real world." The implication that my world wasn't real stung, but I smiled and thanked him. After dinner, Jason cornered our father in the study to explain his investment strategy. I could hear their conversation from the kitchen, where I was helping Mom with dishes. "The key is starting early, Dad. My firm's 401k match is incredible, and I've already started a diversified portfolio." Then, louder, as if ensuring I could hear, "Eliza should really think about retirement planning too. Even with her career choice, those artist types never think about the future." The worst part was that it wasn't said with malice, but with the casual certainty of someone so convinced of their superior wisdom that they see no need to question it. It was during those law firm years that Jason met Vanessa Harrington, daughter of real estate developer Robert Harrington and philanthropist Diana Harrington. Their courtship played out on social media, like a lifestyle magazine spread. Sailing on the Harringtons' yacht, weekend trips to Napa Valley, charity galas where Vanessa dazzled in designer gowns. When Jason brought her home for Thanksgiving, Vanessa was unfailingly polite, but looked around our modest family home with the benign curiosity of someone visiting a foreign country. "So, Eliza," she said when we were briefly alone in the kitchen, "Jason tells me you're an artist. How fascinating. I've always wished I had a creative hobby." The word hobby hung between us, revealing everything about how Jason had described my life's work to her. "What sorts of little projects are you working on?" she continued, and I heard Jason's voice in her question. I explained my recent mixed media series, exploring urban decay and renewal, watching her eyes glaze over slightly. "How interesting," she said, clearly not interested at all. "You must show me sometime." We both knew she didn't mean it. When I secured my teaching position at Riverside Community College, my parents finally breathed a sigh of relief. "At least it's steady," Mom said. "With benefits," Dad added approvingly. A week later, when Jason made junior partner, after just 3 years at his firm, my parents threw a surprise party complete with champagne and invited the extended family. My teaching job warranted a card. At that party, Jason cornered me by the punch bowl, his expression a perfect blend of concern and condescension. "Listen, Liz, I've been thinking about your student loans. I know teaching doesn't pay much, and those art school loans must be killing you. I'd be happy to help you out." He said it loudly enough that our aunt and uncle turned to listen, ensuring everyone knew about both my financial struggles and his generosity. I declined as graciously as I could while swallowing my pride. "That's very thoughtful, Jason, but I'm managing." His response was a knowing smile and a pat on my shoulder. Well, the offer stands. Family takes care of family. What he really meant was that successful family members take care of unsuccessful ones. And we both knew which category he had placed me in. My position teaching art at Riverside Community College brought unexpected joy, despite the circumstances that led me there. Standing in front of a classroom of diverse students, many of whom were taking their first ever art class, ignited something powerful in me. There was the returning student in her 50s, finally pursuing her passion after raising children. The factory worker exploring creativity after decades of mechanical labor. The shy teenager who found her voice through visual expression. Their progress and breakthroughs became my victories. When Maria, an immigrant grandmother, created her first successful still life and cried because she'd never made anything beautiful before, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. But while emotionally fulfilling, teaching at a community college came with significant financial challenges. My salary barely covered my basic expenses, plus student loan payments, leaving nothing for savings or emergencies. My apartment in the older part of town had temperamental plumbing and neighbors who argued loudly at 3 in the morning. My 10-year-old Honda frequently needed repairs I couldn't afford, forcing me to become intimately familiar with public transportation schedules. Then came the root canal without adequate dental insurance, maxing out my only credit card. Through it all, Jason's periodic check-ins felt less like brotherly concern and more like opportunities to highlight my struggles against his success. "How's the teaching going?" he'd ask during monthly family phone calls, his voice carrying that distinct note of someone inquiring about a temporary situation rather than a career. Still at that community college, as if waiting for me to come to my senses and find a real job. The contrast between our lives became painfully apparent when Jason and Vanessa visited my apartment before meeting friends for dinner downtown. I'd spent days cleaning and decorating, even splurging on fresh flowers to brighten the small space. Their arrival in Jason's new BMW was like a visitation from another world. Vanessa's casual designer outfit probably cost 3 months of my rent. "It's cozy," Jason said, looking around my one-bedroom apartment with poorly disguised dismay. Vanessa nodded too enthusiastically. "So much character. And this neighborhood is very authentic." I watched them take in the mismatched furniture, the stacks of art books, the makeshift studio I'd created in the corner of my living room. Jason opened my refrigerator without asking and frowned at its meager contents. "You know," he said, closing the door, "my friend David runs the marketing department at Broderick Solutions. They always need people who can design things I could put in a word." The suggestion came with a pointed glance at the stack of bills on my counter. "The starting salary would be double what you're making now." I declined as politely as I could, explaining that I loved teaching. Jason shrugged, as if I'd chosen to remain sick when offered medicine. "Your call, but the offer stands." 2 months later, my car's transmission failed completely, requiring a repair that exceeded my available funds. After exhausting all other options, I had to call my parents and ask for help. The conversation was brief and uncomfortable, with my father sighing heavily before agreeing to transfer the money. "We're happy to help, Eliza," my mother said, "but we worry about you. Maybe it's time to consider what Jason suggested about the marketing job." The humiliation of that call stayed with me for weeks. The one bright spot during this challenging period was my friendship with Sam Chen, who taught digital media in the same department. Sam recognized my artistic talent in a way my family never had, often stopping by my classroom to see what my students and I were working on. "You know you're wasted here, right?" he said one evening as we graded assignments together. "Don't get me wrong, you're an amazing teacher, but your own work deserves to be seen." Sam was the first person in years to talk about my art as something valuable in its own right, not just a hobby or a fallback teaching credential. When I showed him my personal portfolio, the pieces I worked on late at night when my tiny apartment grew too quiet, he was silent for a long moment. "Eliza, these are extraordinary. Why aren't you submitting to galleries?" The question hit me like a physical blow because I knew the answer. Years of Jason's dismissal and my family's lack of faith had convinced me I wasn't good enough. Sam's belief in my work rekindled something I'd nearly lost. He began sending me information about gallery submissions and artist residencies, gently pushing me to put my work into the world again. "The worst they can say is no," he reminded me, "and rejection is just one person's opinion." With Sam's encouragement, I slowly began to consider possibilities I'd abandoned years before. Perhaps there was a path forward that honored both my teaching and my art. Perhaps Jason's vision of success wasn't the only valid one. But even as these thoughts formed, financial reality continued to press in. Another rent increase, a notice that my student loan payment would go up, medical bills from an emergency room visit after a severe allergic reaction. Each new financial pressure seemed to validate Jason's perspective and undermine my own choices. I began to wonder if he had been right all along. The night everything changed began like any other. I came home from teaching an evening class, ate reheated pasta, standing over my kitchen sink, and stared at the stack of bills I couldn't pay. A particularly difficult call with my parents earlier that day had left me raw. "We're just concerned about your future," Mom had said, while Dad added, "There's no shame in admitting you need a more practical path." Their words, echoing Jason's lifetime of judgment, circled in my head until I couldn't stand the quiet apartment anymore. At midnight, I pulled out canvases and materials I hadn't touched in weeks. Something in me had reached breaking point, a pressure that could only release through creation. I worked until sunrise in a state of flow I hadn't experienced since art school, combining painting with found objects I'd been collecting. Rusted metal, fragments of mirrors, discarded electronics, pieces of text from old books. I incorporated techniques I taught my students, but rarely used myself anymore, taking risks I would have avoided before. When morning light filtered through my windows, I stepped back and saw something different from anything I'd created before. The piece spoke of constraint and freedom, limitation and possibility, all at once. It wasn't planned or perfect, but it was undeniably alive. Too exhausted to analyze it, I collapsed into bed and slept through my alarm, missing my morning office hours for the first time ever. A week later, impulse drove me to show the piece to Marco Diaz, owner of a small local gallery I passed on my way to work. I'd never had the courage to enter before, always assuming my work wouldn't be gallery material, as Jason had so often implied. Marco studied the piece in silence so long, I began to regret the decision. "This is interesting," he finally said, looking up at me. "Do you have more?" I invited him to my apartment that weekend to see the other pieces I'd created in the same emotional state. Marco walked around my makeshift living room studio, examining each piece with careful attention. "You're combining elements in a way I haven't seen before," he said. "There's something raw here, but also technically sophisticated." He looked at me directly. "I have a small show opening up in 3 weeks. An artist just pulled out. I'd like to include 3 of these pieces." I almost said no, years of doubt rising like a tide, but Sam's voice echoed in my head. "The worst they can say is no." Instead, I heard myself say yes. The night of the showing, I almost didn't attend, convinced no one would look twice at my work. Sam practically dragged me there, insisting I wear something nicer than my teaching clothes, and helping me prepare comments in case anyone asked about my process. "They will ask," he assured me. "Trust me." To my astonishment, people did ask. More surprisingly, people bought all 3 pieces, sold that night, one to a local business owner who commissioned another for his office. Marco asked if I had more work to show. Something shifted inside me as I realized that strangers valued what my own family had dismissed. Over the next few months, I developed what Marco called my signature style, combining traditional painting techniques with assemblage, using objects most people overlooked or discarded. I worked every night after teaching, building a collection that spoke to transformation and hidden value. Marco gave me a small solo show, which sold out. A regional art blog featured my work, bringing new attention. I created a website and social media presence with Sam's help, finding a small but growing audience for my vision. My first significant commission came from Elaine Winters, a wealthy collector known for spotting emerging talent. She visited my apartment studio, stepping carefully around my projects spread across the floor. "You need a proper workspace," she said, not unkindly. The piece she commissioned paid enough to clear my most pressing debts and create a small financial cushion for the first time in my adult life. When the local Arts Council awarded me a grant to create a public installation, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in years: possibility. With each small success, I gradually rebuilt the confidence that had been eroded by years of Jason's dismissal and my parents' doubt. I remained passionate about teaching, finding that my renewed creative practice actually enhanced my ability to connect with students. But I now had another identity emerging alongside teacher, working artist. When I mentioned selling a major piece to Jason during a family dinner, his response was dismissive as ever. "That's nice. I guess some people will buy anything these days." He chuckled, clearly assuming my sales were flukes or pity purchases. Art is so subjective, isn't it? The comment would have crushed me months earlier. Instead, I thought of Elaine Winters, who had purchased 3 more pieces and introduced my work to her collector friends. I thought of the serious critical attention beginning to come my way. I smiled and changed the subject, realizing that Jason's opinion had less power over me with each passing day. My creative breakthrough wasn't just artistic. It was a reclaiming of my own narrative about what success could look like on my terms. Eastern Arts Reviews feature on Emerging Artists Transforming Ordinary Materials marked a turning point in my career trajectory. The 4-page spread included photographs of my work and studio practice, along with an interview where I discussed my teaching and artistic philosophy. The day the issue hit newsstands, my email inbox flooded with inquiries from galleries, collectors, and fellow artists. Among them was an invitation from Wesley Gallery in the city, known for launching significant, contemporary careers. "We'd like to include your work in our new Perspectives showcase," the email read. "Please contact us to discuss details." My hands shook as I called Sam to share the news. "This is huge, Eliza," he said, his voice echoing my own disbelief. "Wesley doesn't waste time on artists unless they see serious potential." The showcase led to connections with serious collectors who appreciated my unique approach. Commissions began coming in faster than I could fulfill them, while maintaining my teaching schedule. I established a waiting list, something I never imagined would be necessary. My prices doubled, then tripled, based on market demand rather than my own valuation. For the first time, I began paying down my student loans in meaningful amounts rather than just covering minimum payments. When I called my parents to share the news about the Wesley showcase, their response was tempered with the caution I'd come to expect. "That sounds nice, honey," Mom said. "Is this gallery well known?" Dad was more direct. "Is there good money in this, or is it just for exposure? You know exposure doesn't pay bills." Their questions revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of what was happening. They still saw my art as a side hobby, rather than a burgeoning career, despite evidence to the contrary. Jason's reaction shifted from outright dismissal to subtle undermining. When I mentioned a significant sale during a family video call, he raised his eyebrows. "Art is so trend-driven, isn't it? One minute people are crazy about something, the next they've moved on to the next big thing. Hope you're saving that money." The comment revealed his view of my success as temporary and insubstantial compared to his solid legal career. The watershed moment came when Urban Space, a major corporate development, commissioned a large-scale installation for their headquarters atrium. The contract value equaled Jason's monthly salary. The day I signed it, I felt a strange combination of validation and sadness that I still measured my achievements against my brother's yardstick. As demand grew, I hired Zoe, a recent art school graduate, as a part-time assistant to help manage the business aspects of my practice. She organized my schedule, handled correspondence, and assisted with material preparation. Having help allowed me to focus more on creation while maintaining my teaching position, which I refused to give up. Despite my growing success, my financial situation improved dramatically. I moved from my cramped apartment to a 2-bedroom unit in a renovated industrial building, converting the second bedroom into a proper studio with north-facing windows that provided perfect natural light. I replaced my unreliable Honda with a modest but new Subaru. I started contributing to a retirement account, quietly addressing one of my father's persistent concerns. When my parents visited my new apartment and studio, I watched their expressions shift as they took in the professional setup, the organized materials, the framed magazine features on the walls, and the stack of business correspondence on my desk. Mom ran her hand over a finished canvas, waiting for delivery to a collector in Chicago. "This is really happening for you, isn't it?" she said, surprise evident in her voice. Dad examined the spreadsheet of commissioned work and pending sales that Zoe had prepared. "Do you have someone helping with your taxes?" he asked. Art sales can get complicated. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging that my career had financial legitimacy. Despite the evidence before them, their lingering doubt emerged over dinner. "This all looks wonderful," Mom said, "but art can be so unpredictable. What's your backup plan if interest in your work slows down?" Dad nodded in agreement. "Do you have a retirement plan? Healthcare coverage? What about market downturns?" Their questions revealed the persistence of Jason's narrative about my career. Despite all evidence to the contrary, I explained my financial planning, the diversity of my income streams between teaching, sales, and commissions, and the growing waiting list for my work. They listened and nodded, but I could see they weren't fully convinced. Some part of them still believed Jason's path was inherently more secure and respectable than mine. Their doubt stung, but less sharply than before. I was beginning to understand that their perspective was limited by their own experiences and fears. Their approval, while still desired, no longer determined my sense of self-worth. My success was real, regardless of whether they fully recognized it. I was learning to define achievement on my own terms, rather than through Jason's lens or my parents' anxiety. Still, some childish part of me wished they could see me clearly, without the distorting filter of comparison to my brother. That wish would soon be tested in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The invitation arrived on cream cardstock, so thick it felt like fabric, embossed with gold lettering announcing the engagement of Jason Morgan and Vanessa Harrington at the Lakeview Country Club. Black tie requested, read the note at the bottom, along with details about the registry at exclusive department stores, where the least expensive item cost more than a week of my teaching salary. My first instinct was to decline. Every interaction with Jason inevitably left me feeling judged and diminished. Adding Vanessa's wealthy family and Jason's high-powered colleagues to the mix seemed like a recipe for discomfort. "You should go," Sam insisted over coffee when I showed him the invitation. "You're not the struggling little sister anymore. Show up as the successful artist you've become." His words resonated, but anxiety still churned in my stomach. If I attended, what would I wear? My wardrobe consisted primarily of teaching clothes, studio work clothes, and a few business casual options for gallery meetings. Nothing approached the formality of a black tie country club event. After much internal debate, I decided that if I was going to attend, I wouldn't try to blend in with Jason's world. Instead, I would represent myself authentically. I found a local designer who created a striking formal dress, incorporating elements that reflected my artistic sensibility: textured fabric, asymmetrical design, and subtle but unique detailing. It wasn't conventional, but it was unmistakably me. 2 weeks before the engagement party, I met my mother's friend Barbara for lunch. She had always been kind to me, showing genuine interest in my art, even when my family didn't. After updating her on my career developments, Barbara hesitated, then said something that stopped me cold. "I'm so glad things are going well for you, Eliza." From what Jason has been saying, I was concerned. My confusion must have shown on my face, because she continued, her voice gentle. He's mentioned several times that your teaching position was in jeopardy because of budget cuts, and that your art was, well, that you were mostly selling to friends who felt obligated to support you. The revelation left me speechless. While I processed this information, Barbara added, I thought it was strange, especially after seeing that beautiful article about your work. Jason made it sound like you were really struggling. On the drive home, anger replaced shock. Jason hadn't simply dismissed my success. He had actively misrepresented it to family and friends. He'd constructed a narrative that maintained his position as the successful sibling, while casting me as struggling and dependent on charity. The pattern continued. At the family dinner the night before the engagement party, Jason dominated the conversation with details about the lakefront property he and Vanessa were purchasing. 4 bedrooms, 5 baths, and a boat dock, he explained, showing photos on his phone. The market's competitive, but with my year-end bonus, we managed to put down 30%. When conversation briefly turned to my recent commission for a hospital healing garden, Jason quickly redirected. Speaking of money, Liz, are you handling the tax implications of your art sales properly? Self-employment taxes can be brutal if you're not careful. His tone was one of brotherly concern, but the subtext was clear. I couldn't possibly understand such sophisticated financial matters without his guidance. Actually, I replied, my accountant has been tremendously helpful with tax planning. The momentary surprise on his face was quickly masked, but not before I caught it. He hadn't expected me to have an accountant. That dinner clarified something I'd been feeling increasingly over the past year. Jason felt threatened by my success. His identity had been built around being the successful sibling, the one who made the right choices, while I floundered with impractical dreams. My growing recognition and financial stability disrupted that narrative. Rather than revise his understanding, he'd chosen to minimize and misrepresent my achievements to maintain his perceived superior position. Driving home that night, I made a decision. I would attend the engagement party, not seeking approval or validation, but simply as myself, an artist and teacher who had found her own path to success. Moreover, I would bring a gift that made a statement, not out of spite, but as a gentle correction to years of mischaracterization. The next morning, I began assembling the perfect engagement present. It wasn't expensive in the conventional sense, but its meaning would be unmistakable to the person it mattered most to, my brother. I carefully selected items that represented both my journey and my current reality. Copies of magazine features and reviews, photographs of major installations, and the formal announcement of my upcoming solo exhibition at a prestigious gallery. I added financial documentation that would speak the language Jason respected. Bank statements showing healthy balances, investment account summaries, and the paid-in-full notice for my student loans. The final item was a check returning the money my parents had loaned me for car repairs years ago, with interest. I arranged everything in an elegant box, wrapped it in silver paper, and tied it with a simple blue ribbon. The gift wasn't meant to humiliate, but to correct a false narrative. It would either open Jason's eyes to the reality of my life, or confirm that his view of me had never been about facts at all. Either way, I would know where we stood. The Lakeview Country Club sprawled across manicured grounds overlooking the water, its stone facade and columned entrance screaming old money and exclusivity. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, where valets in crisp uniforms assisted arriving guests. I parked my practical Subaru myself in the furthest lot, using the walk to calm my nerves before entering Jason and Vanessa's world. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over flower arrangements taller than me. A string quartet played in the corner of the ballroom, where guests in designer evening wear clustered in conversation groups. I recognized faces from Jason's social media, law partners, college friends, and Vanessa's family connections from the worlds of real estate and finance. My hand clutched the gift box as I moved through the crowd, feeling conspicuously different despite my formal attire. "You must be Eliza," said a man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, extending his hand. "Jason's little sister. The teacher, right?" I smiled and confirmed both points, adding, "I'm also an artist." His eyebrows lifted slightly. How interesting. My daughter took art classes in elementary school. She loved finger painting. He chuckled and moved on before I could respond, clearly having placed me in a box that required no further conversation. Similar interactions followed. Jason's colleagues made polite small talk, while scanning the room for more important connections. One asked if my community college position was rewarding despite the challenges. Without specifying what challenges he meant, another inquired if I had considered graduate school to advance my career. The assumption being that teaching art was obviously insufficient. Vanessa's mother, Diana, approached with practiced social grace. "Eliza, darling, we're so pleased you could join us." Her eyes assessed my unique dress, with the briefest flicker of disapproval. "Vanessa mentioned you teach. Children are so important to our future, aren't they?" I started to explain that I taught adults at the college level, but she had already shifted her attention to an approaching couple she deemed more significant. As I sipped sparkling water at the edge of the room, I overheard a conversation between Vanessa and three women with identical blonde highlights and tennis tans. "That's his sister," Vanessa said, not noticing me nearby. "The one I told you about. She teaches art at some community college. Jason's always trying to help her financially, but she's very proud." One woman made a sympathetic noise. "It must be difficult for her, seeing how successful Jason is." Vanessa nodded. "He worries about her. She's never quite found her way. Poor thing. The family's concerned about her future." The conversation drifted to honeymoon plans, but the damage was done. Their words confirmed everything Barbara had told me about Jason's characterization of my life. Dinner was served at round tables, draped in white linen. I found myself seated with distant relatives and Vanessa's former roommate, far from the center table where Jason, Vanessa, and their parents presided. My table mates made perfunctory conversation about the weather and the excellent wine, before turning to discussions of vacation homes and private school applications that excluded me entirely. As dessert was served, Jason stood and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted as he began his speech, perfectly calibrated to sound humble while highlighting his accomplishments. He thanked the Harringtons for their generosity, his firm for their support, and his friends for their loyalty. Then he turned philosophical. "Success isn't an accident," he said, scanning the room. "It comes from making the right choices, pursuing excellence, and never settling for less than you're capable of." His gaze found mine across the tables. "Some of us rise to meet our potential, while others just exist. I'm grateful to have had the wisdom to recognize opportunity and the discipline to seize it." The room erupted in approving laughter and applause. Most guests heard a charming, if slightly self-congratulatory toast. I heard the continuation of a narrative Jason had been constructing since childhood, with me cast as the cautionary tale to his success story. The humiliation burned through me as 200 guests chuckled at what they perceived as a harmless platitude, but what I recognized as a direct reference to my supposed failures. In that moment of public diminishment, my phone vibrated with a text from Sam. "Remember who you are. Your success doesn't need their validation." His words steadied me. I looked down at the silver-wrapped box on my lap, the gift I had carefully prepared. This was the moment it was meant for. As the applause faded and guests lifted their glasses, I rose from my seat. The movement drew attention as I walked slowly across the silent room, gift box in hand. Jason's expression shifted from surprised to wary as I approached the head table. Vanessa's smile remained fixed, but her eyes showed confusion. "For the groom," I said simply, placing the box before Jason. His smile turned smug as he accepted it, clearly expecting something insignificant he could acknowledge with benevolent appreciation. Another opportunity to demonstrate his superiority through gracious acceptance of whatever modest offering his struggling sister could afford. "How thoughtful of you to bring a gift, Liz," he said, using the childhood nickname I'd always hated, his tone suggesting I needn't have bothered. The room watched as he untied the ribbon and lifted the lid, expecting the moment to pass quickly before returning to celebration. Instead, Jason's expression froze as he looked at the contents of the box. Jason's hands stilled on the edge of the box, his confident smile faltering as he registered what he was seeing. Inside, arranged carefully on tissue paper, lay the tangible evidence of everything he had denied about my life. The Eastern Arts review spread showed my photograph alongside images of my installations in prominent locations. The invitation to my upcoming solo exhibition at Keller Gallery, known for representing established contemporary artists, was unmistakable with its embossed logo. The feature from American Art Today, naming me among 10 emerging artists redefining mixed media, couldn't be dismissed as a fluke or friendly publicity. But what truly captured Jason's attention was the financial documentation beneath the press materials. His fingers lifted the bank statements, showing balances that rivaled his own savings. The investment portfolio summary demonstrated not just artistic success, but financial literacy. The student loan payoff notice revealed I'd cleared the debt he'd frequently referenced as evidence of my poor choices. And finally, the check to our parents, repaying their loan with interest, directly contradicted his narrative of my continued dependence. Each item systematically dismantled the story he had constructed about me over decades and reinforced to family and friends. Jason's face cycled through emotions: surprise, confusion, disbelief, and finally, the beginning of something that looked remarkably like shame. He glanced up at me, then back at the contents of the box, clearly struggling to integrate this new information with his long-held beliefs about my life. Vanessa leaned over, curious about what had silenced her normally loquacious fiancé. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose as she recognized the Keller Gallery letterhead. "Isn't that the gallery where Daddy's friend bought that incredibly expensive piece last year?" she asked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. The question caught the attention of Vanessa's parents. Her father, Robert, moved closer, peering into the box with new interest. "Keller doesn't represent hobbyists," he said, his tone revealing a re-evaluation in progress. Diana Harrington's gaze shifted between me and the box contents, her social calculation visibly adjusting. The whispers began spreading from the head table outward as guests realized something unexpected was occurring. I hadn't planned what to say in this moment, but words came naturally as I looked directly at Jason. "Some of us create something meaningful," I said quietly. "Others just acquire things." The statement wasn't meant to wound, but to balance the scales after his public toast. It was a gentle declaration of my own definition of success, independent of his measuring stick. As I turned to walk away, the image consultant, who had dismissed me earlier, approached with an entirely different demeanor. "I didn't realize you were that Eliza Morgan," he said. "My client just purchased one of your pieces for their corporate headquarters. Your work is extraordinary." Others began to take notice, connecting my name with artwork they had seen or heard discussed in their social circles. A gallerist mentioned her interest in my unconventional materials. A collector asked about my waiting list. The whispers took on a different quality as the reality of my professional standing permeated the room. Jason attempted to recover, plastering on his courtroom smile and standing to reclaim attention. "My talented sister," he announced, his voice slightly too loud, always full of surprises. But his usual confident tone had a hollow quality, and guests were already moving on to other conversations, many now including me, in ways they hadn't before. Vanessa's father cornered me by the dessert table, business card in hand. "We're renovating our Aspen property," he said. "I'd like to discuss commissioning a piece for the main living area." Diana Harrington, who had barely acknowledged me earlier, suddenly remembered her involvement with the Arts Council. "We should talk about featuring your work at our annual benefit," she suggested, touching my arm as if we were old friends. The shift was remarkable, not because I needed their validation, but because it revealed how quickly perceptions could change once Jason's narrative no longer framed their understanding of who I was. As the party continued, I felt a strange combination of vindication and sadness. The years of diminishment had ended, but at what cost to my relationship with my brother? Jason avoided eye contact for the remainder of the evening, staying surrounded by colleagues and friends, as if they could shield him from this new reality, where his sister wasn't a cautionary tale, but a success story by any measure. I hadn't. intended the gift as revenge, but as a correction to a false narrative that had shaped family dynamics for too long. Still, watching Jason's discomfort brought no pleasure. I realized I wanted not triumph over my brother, but simply recognition and respect between equals. Whether that was now possible remained to be seen. I left the engagement party earlier than most guests, declining several invitations to after-parties and networking opportunities. The drive home gave me time to process the evening's events and prepare for whatever might come next. The confrontation had been necessary, but rebuilding would require something different from both of us. The question was whether Jason could accept a new understanding of our relationship, one where neither of us needed to diminish the other to feel successful. 3 days passed without word from Jason or my parents. Then a week. I focused on teaching and completing commissions, trying not to check my phone constantly for messages that didn't come. The silence itself was significant, proof that something fundamental had shifted. The first response came not from my immediate family, but from the wider world. My inbox flooded with inquiries from people who had attended the engagement party, gallery representatives, private collectors, corporate art consultants, all suddenly aware of my work through the unexpected reveal at Jason's celebration. Catherine Mills, from Eastside Gallery, called personally. "I've been following your career for months," she admitted. "After hearing about your presence at the Morgan Harrington engagement, I'm convinced the timing is right. We'd like to discuss exclusive representation in the New York market." The offer exceeded my wildest expectations, providing the kind of stability and exposure most artists only dream about. Teaching had always been my anchor, but this opportunity required serious consideration. After consulting with Sam and Marco, I accepted a modified arrangement that allowed me to maintain my most important classes while pursuing this new chapter in my career. My first major exhibition under Catherine's representation sold out before the opening reception even concluded. Critics praised my authentic voice, an unapologetic challenge to conventional materials hierarchy. The validation was sweet, but I found myself wishing my family could understand what these achievements really meant. 10 days after the engagement party, my parents appeared at my apartment door unannounced. They stood awkwardly in my living room, taking in the space that reflected both my artistic and commercial success. "We saw the announcement about your New York representation," Mom said finally. "Jason showed us everything from the box." Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't understand the scope of what you were accomplishing." Their apology wasn't direct, but it was present in their demeanor and in the questions that followed. Real questions about my work, my process, my vision for the future. They asked to see my studio and spent hours examining pieces in progress, asking about techniques and inspiration with genuine curiosity. "We should have paid more attention," Mom admitted as they prepared to leave. "We were so focused on security that we missed seeing your path clearly." Dad hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Eliza. Different from how I expected to be proud, but proud nonetheless." The reconciliation wasn't perfect or complete, but it was a beginning. They had finally seen me without the filter of comparison to Jason. 2 weeks later, Jason called. His voice lacked its usual confident edge. "We need to talk," he said simply. We met at a quiet cafe, halfway between our homes. He arrived in casual clothes, rather than his usual business attire, looking smaller somehow, less certain. "I've been thinking about what happened," he began after our coffee arrived. "About everything really, all the way back." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. Jason admitted that his need to see himself as the successful sibling had blinded him to my achievements. "I built this story where my choices were right and yours were wrong," he confessed. "I needed that to be true, even when evidence suggested otherwise." He didn't apologize directly. That wasn't his style. But he acknowledged the harm his narrative had caused. "I told myself I was concerned for you," he said. "But really, I needed you to be struggling to validate my own choices." We didn't resolve everything in that one conversation. Decades of competitive dynamics couldn't dissolve in an afternoon, but we established a new foundation based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. Jason asked genuine questions about my work, and I found myself curious about aspects of his life I'd previously dismissed as materialistic status seeking. We parted with a tentative plan to meet monthly, a commitment to building something different. Between us, the aftermath of the engagement party revelation brought other changes too. I established the Morgan Arts Scholarship Fund at Riverside Community College, providing financial support for students pursuing creative paths. Despite economic barriers, the first recipient, a single mother returning to school after years working factory jobs, reminded me powerfully of why teaching remained central to my purpose. Despite growing commercial success, my relationship with my parents evolved into something more honest. They still worried about practical matters, but had begun to understand that security came in different forms. When they attended my major gallery opening in New York, their pride was evident not just to me, but to everyone who spoke with them. Our daughter has always had a unique perspective, Mom told Catherine Mills, without a trace of the qualification that would have accompanied such a statement before. The most unexpected development came through my connection with the Harrington family. Despite the awkward circumstances of our introduction, Robert Harrington's commission request had been genuine. Creating a piece for their Aspen home led to others establishing a relationship based on mutual respect for our different areas of expertise. Through these connections, I met Daniel, an architect specializing in sustainable design, who approached art with genuine curiosity rather than social calculation. Our friendship evolved naturally into something deeper, built on appreciation for each other's creative processes and shared values about what constituted meaningful work. The lessons of this journey revealed themselves gradually. I learned that success defined by others' standards is inherently unstable, while purpose aligned with authentic talent brings a satisfaction that transcends conventional metrics. I discovered that financial security and creative fulfillment aren't opposing forces, but can coexist when approached with intention. Most importantly, I recognize that breaking free from others' narratives about our lives is perhaps the most significant achievement possible. The freedom that comes from defining success on your own terms can't be measured in bank balances or social status, but in the quiet certainty that your path, however unconventional, is genuinely yours. My relationship with Jason will always carry the echoes of our complicated history, but it no longer defines either of us. We're learning, imperfectly but sincerely, to see each other clearly, rather than through the distorting lens of comparison. That clarity might be the most valuable gift either of us has ever received. Have you ever had to redefine success on your own terms when others couldn't see your vision? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more authentic conversations about family dynamics and finding your own path. Remember to share with someone who might need to hear that their unconventional journey is valid too. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to define success in ways that honor your unique gifts and values.